Welcome to lesson number 9 here in DaVinci Resolve. Today we are going to talk about setting up raw projects and more specifically adjusting raw settings at the project level, adjusting raw settings at the clip level. Then after that, we are going to do some HDR grading in our HDR palette, which is very exciting. And finally, we are going to set up a render cache for the raw media project, okay? So these are the things that we'll be covering in this lesson. Once again, just quick reminder is that you can find all the source files that you see available in every lesson that we're going through on the Blackmagic Design website, right? So to find that, just click in the link down this video and you can find everything, all the source media and all the books, ebooks, everything is right down there. Okay, so that is something for you to know. Perfect. So now with that said, let's get started immediately. So the first thing I did here is I just started a new project and just called it Blackmagic Raw Projects. That's all we did so far. All right, so we haven't added anything. All right, so another thing I did is to find where these raw clips are. Okay, so navigate it through some of these bins, all right, into our hard drive, and then just stop there. Okay, so that's all we did so far. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do over here, obviously, is you can also click and look at all the different clips you can see. Okay, and alternatively, you can also see the metadata here, all right, by clicking there. And you can also see the video codec that now tells us this is the Blackmagic RAW. Okay, so remember, we're working with raw clips today, which is something that we haven't done yet. Now, the first thing we're going to do here onto our master, we are going to add 2 bins. So we're going to right click and click here on new bin. Alternatively, you can always use the shortcut. And we are going to first add a media. A media over here, and then we are also going to add a timelines bin as well. So here we're going to type timelines. Perfect. Okay, so we have our media and our timelines. So now with our media selected, all we can do now is just press Command A, right? Select all the different clips. We can just drag them down here. Now this prompts, this dialog box tells us change project frame rate. We're going to say yes. Okay, so we're going to accommodate that. So basically what we're doing is we're changing the project's frame rate to accommodate our clips, right? So I'm going to say change over here. Perfect. And you can see that here our clips are in 23.976 frame rate, right? Drop frame. And to make sure that our project now is also at that specific frame rate, we can come here into our project settings and we can see the timeline frame rate is at 23.976, right? So perfect. Everything is working so far. Awesome. So now the next thing we're going to do is we obviously can look at our clips as we said earlier, and we can see that a few of the clips have some letterboxing, all right? This clip over here, the second one is good. Third one is good, and the fourth one also has letterboxing. So there's something also we want to fix, all right? So first thing we're going to do, once again, is we can come here into our edit page, all right? Now, something that you would see is probably for you, it's going to look like this. Remember that you have these options here to choose between metadata, thumbnail view, or list view. So I like to work in list view when I'm in the edit page, which is something also very beneficial because you have all this information over here. You can expand the window and see that you have a lot of different options, all right? So here with our clip name, all right, you can order them in ascending or descending order to something like that. Then we can select all of them just like that. I'm gonna make this a little bit smaller and we can select all of them, then right click, and you can see we have the option to create new timeline using selected clips, right? So we're gonna click that, and then we can also give it a name. So in this case, we are going to call this the Magic, and this is our raw timeline, okay? Something like that, then keep the rest the way it is, and then we're going to say here create. Okay, once you do that, you can see that now we have all of 4 of our clips into our timeline over here. Now, if you can't see, all right, over here, see for me it's like blank, that is happening because you can click here, okay? You can come into our timeline view options, and now for me personally, I didn't have it active. Over here on the timeline view options, I have it here what it says simple view. But you can also change it to thumbnail view, or you could change it to film strip view, right? So to see something like that in case it works better for you. So in this case, we're going to keep it here in film strip view. All right, just like that. Now we can click away, and you can see that finally we can see all of our clips over here in our timeline. Once again, remember the shortcut. If you press Shift and scroll wheel, all right, you can adjust the size here in this case of my V1, video track 1. If I come down here, I can do the same with the audio track, okay? If they were too big or small for you, you can adjust them holding the Shift button, all right? So that's something very useful to know. Perfect. So now with that done, we can come back up here into our playback. Just as we learned last time, we can choose our render cache and we can select this smart render cache, okay? Which is basically the auto feature in Resolve, all right? And now Resolve, what it's going to do in this case is going to cache out all the different clips, all right? Because this is not like we did in the previous lesson, in lesson number 8, all right? Where only specific clips or nodes were being cached. When you're working with raw files, it works a little bit differently, okay? Because a lot of debayering and a lot of processing is going on, so basically caches everything every single time. All right, so now with that done, all right, we have a nice timeline over here, as you can see, okay? So now, in this case, what we're going to do now is to look at, right, we looked at the clip over here. We saw that our first clip has letterboxing, the next ones don't, and the fourth one has it as well. So now, what we want to do is take a few steps, all right, to make sure that first we fix that letterboxing situation. Then the second step we're going to do is to add some color management, all right, so to fix that as well. And finally, after doing that, we're going to go into our project settings window and into our camera raw tab and make some adjustments there as well. All right, perfect. So now with that done, let's get started. We are now going to click here inside of our project settings. And you can see we have a few different options over here, okay? The one we're going to start with is this image scaling, all right? You can see it over here. Now, on mismatched resolution files, now it says scale entire image to fit, okay, which is optimal because we're technically trying to maintain the most detail we can. But in this case, we want to basically reframe everything to match our timeline, all right? Because so far, the aspect ratio of our clips, 2 of them at least, is now matching our timeline. So let's fix that. So we're going to now choose a different one, which is going to be the scale full frame with crop. All right. So now we're going to lose definitely a bit of detail on our edges, but we can fix that later, okay, once we do some reframing. So scale full frame with crop, okay, and then I can say save. And once I do that, okay, if I come into our first clip, you can see that now, all right, second clip, third clip, fourth clip, there is no letterboxing going on anymore. All right, so that is the first adjustment. All right, very quick, very simple. Once again, that was done into our image scaling and into the mismatched resolution files, all right, into our input scaling over here. That's all we did. Perfect. So now let's take care of color management. If you guys don't know what color management is, I would highly suggest you to look at a previous lesson, lesson number 4, where we quickly talked about that. And alternatively, I am also going to do a series on color management because there is something that is a lot of confusion going on around that topic specifically. And it's something very important, you know, because once you do understand color management, it's going to simplify your workflow extensively. And it's going to just start you, okay? It's going to really make a difference, all right, between just grading things by hand compared to having a properly mapped footage and then having a great starting point, right, to then do your grading, etc. All right, so now with that said, color management, what we're going to do here into our color science, now we are on DaVinci YRGB, which is the standard, okay? YRGB standing for luminance, that's the Y, and then RGB, it's red, green, blue, okay? So we're going to change our color science now from that to DaVinci White RGB color management. Okay, so because we're going to color manage this. On the automatic color management over here, you can see when we have this checked, we only have the option to switch between SDR and HDR. We don't want that. We want to uncheck it. And now on the color processing mode, we have more options available to us. Now, if you want the most versatility off of this, you probably want to choose here custom, okay, where you can give it an input color space, a timeline color space, and an output color space. Okay, now in this case, we are going to choose here HDR, DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, okay, which is very, very good. As you can see here, it gives you an explanation right underneath as extra wide gamut log grading environment, suitable for SDR and HDR deliverables. preserves maximum image fidelity and highlight detail. That is awesome. Okay, so now on the output color space, that is dependent on what deliverables you have. But in this case, we are going to select a standard Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 as our output color space. Okay, so now we know for sure that this is what we want. And now we can click Save. And once we do that, you can see that something has happened. And this is why it's so important to understand color management, because you don't want to do the guesswork, all right? From what you went on the field, what you captured, and then you're trying to guess it by hand, trying to grade it and bring it back to what you saw on set, all right? What you want to do is let the color management option do all the work for you, and then you can grade on top of it, okay? So that is basically what you're doing there. Perfect. Now, with that done, what we're going to do next, we have set up our color management. We have fixed our letterboxing issues that we had. We're going to go back here into our project settings, and we are going to choose now the camera raw option over here. All right, so now let's look at what's happening here. Now here on the master, you can see that our raw profile is set now on the airy, right? So now we don't have airy raw footage here, right? So this is Blackmagic footage, Blackmagic raw. So we are going to change this to B raw or Blackmagic raw over here. All right, once you do that, okay, we are selected our raw profile, the correct one. And basically what we're doing right now, we're debayering, okay, our clips. So then we have our decode quality, right? You have the option to go in full resolution, half resolution, quarter resolution, 1/8 resolution, all right? That is dependent on what you're really looking for. Ideally, full resolution is the best option for you. Then you have the decode using, okay? And you have three options here. The camera metadata, this will keep it, will decode, all right? Will debayer and decode our raw files based on the camera metadata, which means that how the things were captured on set by the DP or camera operator. All right, so if you choose this option, right, you were on set and you know exactly your color temperature, how you were shooting, what lights you had, if you had any, or whatever you were doing, you are aware of exactly what you wanted on set. So now you come back, all right, into Resolve, and then if that's, you know for sure that how you shot it, it's exactly how you want it to be, then keep it to camera metadata, because that is what was captured on set. Now, you also have Blackmagic Raw default, okay? This is if you add any sidecar files, things like that. And finally, you have project, okay? So project now allows you to then go in and make all the adjustments that you need. If you want to change the white balance, okay? And say you shot it, you did indoor, okay? You shot at a color temperature 3200. You had a lot of tungsten, and then, or maybe the opposite is true. You shot at daylight 5600. So all those different things. You can adjust white balance, you can adjust the color space gamma, and all the different settings over here, okay? So you could do all of that by just changing the decode using to project. Now in this case, we don't want to do that because we trust the camera operator or DP, and we are going to keep things, all right, the way they were shot on set. So we're going to keep it to camera metadata. Okay, so that's what we're going to do over here. And remember, this is on a project level. Okay, so we are adjusting things here in the project settings and then clicking save. All right, now we have done everything we needed to do. All right, which set us up for success. So now, for the sake of being organized, now I'm going to go back to the media page over here, or alternatively, you can also work here from the edit, but I'm going to go to the media, and then just to be organized, we are going to move this Blackmagic Raw timeline, all right, into the timelines bin. So just because I have OCD when it comes to being organized, so you can see that now everything is looking great, all right, and you can move through your media or timelines. You can do this, by the way, in the edit page as well, but I just like the media page to keep things organized there. Perfect. So now with that done, okay, we need to talk also about one more thing. All right. So now the way you want to set up raw projects, it's really dependent on your workflow. There's mainly 5 different ways in which you would go about it. So one of the ways would be to use your camera raw project settings and palette, just like we discussed, okay, to set up your raw projects like that. Another way is to use the lookup tables or LUTs, all right, which are become very, very popular among many filmmakers, all right, a bit overused, but they're very popular now in the professional field, especially for dailies workflows. And then other, you have the CST, okay, color space transform, which is my preferred method of working, and whether that is to set up input color space, the timeline color space, and then an output color space, okay? Then you can use the RCM setup, all right? So with the Resolve Color Management, which is also very versatile and powerful, or the ACES, which is an industry standard also that many professional studios adopt. So these are some of the different ways, all right? So the books talks about these as well. You can find that in a graph and shows you, okay, what you prefer. So everybody's different and everyone has a different way of setting up the raw projects at the beginning of their project before starting to actually grade their footage. Okay, perfect. So now let's finally talk about how do we adjust raw settings at the clip level, because so far we've explored the project level, but we haven't done the clip level. So all we have to do now is to go here into our color page. Okay, you can see that now we're here, and now so by default you should have something like this, all right? But all you can do then is to come here, you can see into your camera raw, and then you have something looking like this, all right? Where you have your decode quality over here and a decode using, all right? And then you can see that there's a few other options, but they're not available to us, as you can see over here. Now, all you want to do is also go through your clip before you start any project. Obviously, you would look into your clips, all right? Make sure that whether they're the same codec, so in this case being all B raw footage, or if you have mixed archive footage. So you really want to make sure before you start doing anything, always look at what you have and then start working around that, okay? So first look at what do I have in front of me, and then start making adjustments. Perfect. So now let's get into it. So we're going to start with clip number 1. And as we said, this is the camera raw. Once again, it's very easy. This is where you're going to see, just click here, camera raw, and you see it. It's very hard to miss. Perfect. So now here on the decode using, you can see that we're on project. So this is taking the project settings currently, which is what we set up earlier. Now we want to change it on a clip level, right? We want to work on this individually. Now the question might arise where you say, why would I want to do that if I set it up on the project? Well, you would do this not as often. You would do this only if you have very specific needs for a clip by clip basis, okay? So if you know that this is a special clip, then in that case you would do it. Otherwise, if you set it up in your project, you should be good to go for the most part. So now here on decode using, we can change this now to clip, okay? You can see it here. And once you choose clip, now a few different options open up for us, as you can see over here. Not just on this column over here, but also over here with the color temperature, tint, and exposure. All right, so now you can see that right under it, we have the color science, pretty self-explanatory. Which version, which color science did you have the moment you shot the footage? So you can see that for the B-RAW, we have 2 available options, Gen 4 and Gen 5. We're gonna keep it to Gen 4 because that's how it was shot. Okay, and then underneath we have the white balance, all right, which we are going to keep it as shot, okay, unless you think that whatever was shot or whatever you see here, it's not proper. So you wanted to, you know, maybe change it to a daylight or a fluorescent or whatever the case might be, okay? That's really up to you and your project. Now, underneath over here, you can see that we have our ISO. Once again, pretty self-explanatory. Here is a 100. You can see that then we have a few different options. It goes from 100 up to 1000, all right? So we can adjust the sensitivity to light, all right, into our B-RAW footage. This is what is so great about B-RAW, of course, being raw, is that we can adjust this in post. So now we can go to something like 200, all right? And you can see that now this is a bit brighter, as you can see, and really make all the adjustments we need. So in this case, we're gonna keep it to 100, okay? Because this looks better. And then underneath over here, you can see that we have this option here, highlight recovery, all right? So we're able, you see it is what's happening here. I'm gonna close here the clips for a second so you can see better. You can see what's happening here, okay? We are getting a lot of that highlight back, all right? So a lot of that data level that was lost before checking this highlight recovery. All right. So now this is awesome that you have this option over here. And I always check this on unless, there's no need for it. But most of the time, it's good to have that on. And then over here, you have your color temperature, your tint, and your exposure, of course. So you can further adjust your clips. So now we can see that the color temp, I can change this to something like 6,000 over here. And you can see that you can make it warmer. You can go to something crazy, I believe, to, I don't remember what was it, but like 50,000, something like that. Yeah, all the way up. Okay. So now you can see that you can make all different adjustments. So now how do I set this back? There's, well, two ways. You can just, type whatever you want over here, or you can see that this changed the white balance here to custom. Just go back to as shot, and that resets it now to your color temperature of 5200, the way it was earlier. Underneath, you have your tint. Once again, I don't think I probably need to explain these. All right. I believe everybody's familiar with this. So we can adjust our tint. All right. Green, magenta. All right. Once again, you go something like that. Then, I made a mistake. How do I go back? I don't remember what it was at. Once again, white balance. Go back here as shot. There we go. Boom. All right. And underneath also you have your exposure. All right. So the exposure over here. Now in this case, we're going to keep it the way it is, but you can move this down, you can move it up. All right. And you can make all the adjustments that you need. Now, alternatively, by double clicking, resets it also to the way it was previously. Okay. Perfect. So now this is clip number 1. And you can see that if I choose here on clips, all right, we also have other clips following it. All right, there is a few different options underneath, which is export frames and update sidecar. In case you have sidecar, of course, you update them here. And then you have use changes and use settings. All right, so now what are these? So say I'm selecting also a few other clips. All right, so clip, I press shift and up to clip 4. Now you can see that we have the 2 options now are available for us. All right, so now what do they mean? So now the use settings, basically what this does, this applies all the camera raw settings that we are adjusting or any adjustments that we do, okay, from this selected clip, which is clip number 1 in this case, the clip that is highlighted here in red. And basically what it's doing is going to then copy all of that camera raw data in this palette over here to those clips. So then in this case will be clip number 2, 3, and 4. This is what use settings does. All right, so select a clip, you make all the different changes that you make, all right, and then you apply all those different changes you made to the next following clips. And that's what it does. And then you also have use changes over here, which is a little bit different because that basically ripples only the altered parameters, all right? So it preserves basically the selected clip's individual settings. This is great if you're working with very different clips, then you would use the use changes over here. So now what we're going to do in this case, you can see that obviously we haven't changed here the decode using, all right? So this, you can see that all these different options are not available, whether I do. So what I'm going to do now, if you select only the clip, you see that we don't have the options available. And that is because, once again, I'm going to press shift, select all of them, and now I can type here on use, I can choose this, use changes, okay? And now you can see that we have now actively added our clip, all right, change to clip from project, but it has not copied all the settings that we've added here. That is because you used use changes rather than use settings. We haven't taken the settings from clip number 1 into 2, 3, and 4. All right, so now we're going to go to clip 2, as you can see over here. And on clip 2, obviously everything looks good. I don't think we need to do any adjustments on this one, so we're going to keep it the way it is. All right, and then on clip 3, you can see that we have a problem here in the highlights. And we can see it in the waveform over here in the scopes, okay, where we're definitely going above that 1023 line, or you can see over here. All right, we're clipping our highlights for sure. So now how do we adjust that? Well, there is a few different ways. One of them would be to definitely lower the ISO over here to something like 200, all right? And you can see that now what happens is that this clip gets a little bit darker, all right? And that is okay, because then what we could do, we can go back to our exposure over here, and we can also lower that a bit to something like minus, okay, went to a little bit too far, to something like minus 80. And now what we can see over here is that it's looking a little bit dark. And you might be tempted to say, hey, you know what, I maybe want to just make all the adjustments here. Do not do that. Do not do that, because that is what you have the node editor for, right? So you can work non-distractively with nodes, and then with the primary grading tools, you can make all the different adjustments that you need, right? So over here, what you want to do is just basically get a starting point. That's what you want to do. Over here also on highlight recovery, we are going to check that. You can see how much we bring back over here. Look at that. It's huge. See, this is all lost. I'm going to make this bigger like that. And look at that, and look what happens after you use the highlight recovery. This is why this feature, it's awesome, okay? Also underneath, by the way, you have apply LUT, right? If you want to apply a LUT, I never do this, because then once you start grading, okay, you can do that later on. So you don't have the need to do this in the Camera Raw palette over here. Perfect. So now with that done, you can see that now we have adjusted basically all the different clips. We also have clip number 4 here, which is definitely very dark, but we will not be doing this here, okay? As I said, you'll be tempted to make the adjustments here, but it's better to do them, all right, in the actual node editor. Okay, because then you can make all the different adjustments non-distractively. So ideally, the point of the Camera Raw tab over here is to not do any balancing or creative grading or anything like that. It's not advisable, at least, to do that. The point of this is to just to get your clip to a good starting point, all right? Just make sure that it's exposed right. Maybe on set you felt that, I exposed that at a 400 or maybe 800 ISO and probably was a little bit too bright or too dark. So make those adjustments over here. All right, so something like that, it's good. Or maybe something with color temperature, right? You're off by a bit. You know, you shot in tungsten 3200, but, your camera was set to 5600. So, things like that, where you can go and make few adjustments here in the Camera Raw, but then it should be just that. And then go back here in the node editor, and that's where you're going to start doing your actual grading. All right, so that is a bit about working in the Camera Raw palette. Now, once again, it's really up to you. How do you want to work with this? But it's really dependent on a project by project basis. I do use this feature quite a lot because I do like to really go in and be very specific with some clips. And other times, it's just through the project settings, just the way we did it earlier. Now, you can also see that over here, by the way, something I should say, we also have the color space and gamma, but it's not available over here. Now, there is a reason why this is happening. This is happening because we are working, remember, in DaVinci YRGB color managed, all right? If you want to have these, you would have to switch this to DaVinci YRGB, okay? And that is why that is happening. Okay, now we're going to jump on the most exciting part in this tutorial, which I bet everybody is very excited about, which is the HDR palette, which is also called the HDR grade here in Resolve. So we're going to click on it, all right, and you can see that we have a few different wheels over here. You have light, highlight, specular, global, right? So at first glance, things look very similar to what you're used to so far with your color wheels over here, as you could see. But there is one major difference over here, that here instead on the high dynamic range color wheels, you have the option to bank, okay? Banking meaning you can select all the different tonal ranges. Now you can do this in either two ways. You can see that right now, the first 3 over here are highlighted. That is telling us that 3, our black, our dark, and shadow, all right, are the ones that we have available here in our viewer, alongside the global. Now, the global never changes over here, okay? So all you're going to see a change is going to be the first 3 wheels over here, all right? So if I now click on the next one over here, now you can see that we have the next 3 highlighted with the first one, okay, which was our black. now being substituted by the next one. All right, so now basically that is what's happening. So now you can move between all the different tonal ranges either by clicking on each wheel over here, or you could use your arrows, okay, to move in between. And it's very, very easy. Now, what if, okay, I don't want that global to be static there. I don't want it to, you know, because we see that as we scroll through, only the first 3 are moving over here, the first 3 wheels. But we don't want that, all right? Say we want 4 at a time. You could do that very easily by clicking here on these 3 dots over here. And you can see that we have the option to bank global with color wheels, okay? So now by checking this one over here, now you can see that we have our black, our dark, our shadow, our light, but we don't have our global. Why? Because that is going to be at the end. You can also see that now we have 7, all right, different options here compared to 6, which was earlier. So if I keep moving with my arrow, you can see that the global is here at the end, okay? So that is an option that you have available to you, just like that. In case you decide, I like it how it was better at the beginning, all right? I prefer the way it was. You can just click here on those 3 dots and then uncheck the bank global with color wheels, okay? And now you can see that it's again here, right? The global is right here, and now you can move only between the first 3, all right? And which are the black, dark, shadow, as you can see, and then light, highlight, and specular. All right, perfect. So now the first thing we're going to do here on our node, we are going to rename this to HDR over here, and then we're going to say balance. All right, so this is our HDR balance, just like that. Now, why would you want to use HDR? Is the operation very different compared to using your standard color wheels? Well, this is perfect to use the HDR palette, as the title suggests, as the name suggests, if you're working with HDR footage, okay? So high dynamic range footage, this is perfect. It is doable also. Things are doable with the primary color wheels as well, but the difference is that you have much more versatility, or I should say you're much more flexible, and it's much more pinpointed, all right? All the different tonal ranges that you can select, all right? Now, that is very useful because it saves you a lot of time, okay? Now, you can do this, as I said, with the primary color wheels. However, you have to do a mix of primaries, secondaries. There is a lot of different selections that need to go through it. So that is sort of what that does and how that saves you a lot of time. And once again, you have these very, very, very selective, okay, tonal ranges that you can really pinpoint and choose what tonal range am I going to affect. As we're going to see in this tutorial very soon, it really is awesome how much faster you can work once you really get used to the HDR palette, okay? Because you can say, hey, I want to just target my darks, and or I want to target my specular, right? And then you just target those tonal ranges, and then you move much quicker that way. Now, that is one of the differences. Another major difference, in fact, is the global here. You can see. Now, this is the same as the offset over here in the sense that they do the same thing. However, they work very differently in the sense that now the offset over here, okay, affects the image uniformly. Whether you brighten your image, whatever you are doing to it, okay, whether you're adding a specific tint, all right, you are obviously going to affect the image uniformly. On the other hand, here on the global, things work a little bit different because the global wheel, all right, over here, basically pinches the black and white points of your image, of your signal, and then rolls the shadows and highlights, okay? It compresses them without clipping them, but it's basically, it compresses them either on either extreme of the waveform, okay? So on the high end and the low end. So basically every adjustment you make to the global, whether it's the exposure, whether that's the saturation, okay, it basically has less effect on our shadows and highlights, which is much more natural. So produces these very natural looking changes rather than overexposing or affecting, right, very heavily highlights and shadows. So it's much a sweeter roll off basically. And that, whether that's for exposure or saturation, that is a big advantage here of the global wheel compared to the offset, as we said, that sometimes it's a little bit too uniform, right? So, which obviously has its uses and it's great, but that is another difference, that the global works a little bit differently over here. Now, another thing that you can see over here, okay, now we're global, you can see that we have a temperature slider on the left side, and then we have a tint slider on the right side over here. Alternatively, okay, these are also over here as well, as you could see. You have your temperature and you have your tint. Okay, so let's go on clip number 1. We are going to start working on this clip, and we are also going to call this as well to HDR over here, balance, just like that. Okay, and now if I make any adjustments, all right, to my global, let me show you. So if I make it colder to something like that, or warmer to something like that, you can see that we are affecting our temperature as well. So if I reset this, you see that now it resets on a global. So whether you are moving it through here, right, or through here, they work in conjunction. Okay, so it's the same thing, and the same is true for the tint. So if I go magenta or green, whether I prefer to slide this way or this way, the same is true on the tint slider over here. Okay, you can see that we're affecting it exactly the same. So these are linked, just something to be aware of. All right. Now, the other advantage of the temperature and tint, okay, is that these sliders can also be used with more accuracy. They're more accurate to compare to something like in the color wheels. All right. And that is another advantage of using the temperature and tint slider in the HDR palette, which in cases where I don't have raw footage and I'm doing it directly from the camera raw, I do prefer to use the HDR temperature and tint sliders because they're very, very natural. Now, the next thing is also, we can see that we have, as we are familiar with all the different other sliders, we have our contrast and pivot, which are also fundamentally very, very good as well here because they keep saturation, okay, perpetually constant when we make any adjustment, okay? So it's not like that you are making adjustment and then it's gonna add high contrast or oversaturation in the highlights or anything like that. All right, so that is another huge advantage. And then something that is different over here, you can see that we have this BOFS, which basically stands for black offset, which is basically, this determines the minimum value of the signal. So like what are our darkest shadows, all right? And gently compresses the data above it. So now this is something that you could use as well. You could either type whatever number you want, or you can just drag it, all right, and then make a decision accordingly, just the way you like it. All right, so now we are here on our HDR balance, as you can see, our node that we just created, and here on waveform, by the way, we're going to change this to Y over here, and then turn off the colorize. You can also make adjustments to your waveform and graticule if you need so, and also to your low and high, all right? We can also make a tutorial about the scopes. But anyway, so now we can see that we have something like this, okay? So this is our signal so far. And we can see that overall, our trace looks pretty good, okay? Because we don't have any, we're not clipping, right? Whether that is in the blacks or in the highlights over here, okay? So the image looks pretty good. However, we can make some adjustments here to our image, okay? We can make it a little bit more saturated, all right? Because definitely it needs a little bit of that. And definitely we can add a little bit more contrast and also change a little bit, make the sky a little bit bluer, all right? So make a few adjustments to our image and make it look a little bit better. All right, so now the first thing we're going to do over here, we are going to start with our global over here, and the first thing we're going to do once again is here on the exposure. You can see that we have the exposure and saturation. All right, so now the exposure is very similar to your, when you're on your offset, okay, this slider down here that adjusts our exposure. That is exactly what is happening here with the exposure in the global, okay? And then we have also the saturation. And you can see the exposure and saturation, we have it for each individual wheel, okay? Whether we keep banking through them, you can see that each wheel has one, all right? So that's something to be aware. Perfect. So on our global exposure, we're going to raise this now, okay? And we are going to brighten up our image to something like that. And once again, you press Command D before and after. You can see that now our image is brighter. Now, let's also add a little bit more saturation to this, all right? So you can see now we have our sat slider, and we are going to increase this as well, all right? Something that you could do is go too far, right? So up to 2, you can see, and then bring it back. So I'm gonna also make it a little bit bigger so you can see better, just like that. And now we can come back a bit, all right? And we're gonna go to 1.5, something like that. Now, look at the difference that this made just with these 2 moves. So Command D, all right? Look at the before, look at the after. 2 adjustments, right? Just to show you how much in color grading, every little adjustment makes such a huge difference to your image, all right? So that is something also to be aware of, okay? Perfect. Now, something to talk about over here, because we didn't explain in detail, you can see that our 6 wheels over here so far, we looked at all of them, but we didn't explain what they are. Now, think of it like this. There is 2 parts, all right? There is a dark zone and there is the light zone, all right? So 3 and 3. You can see we have the first 3 and here 3 more. The first 3 over here, our black, dark, and shadow, these are our dark zones, okay? Black, dark, shadow. If I move all the way across, we have our light, highlight, and specular. All right, so these are our light zones. Perfect. Now, there is you would see that the black obviously is affecting the darkest portions of our image. The dark is affecting not as dark, but pretty dark portions, okay? And then the shadow, it's the brightest dark zones in our image. Then the same is true for the rest over here, where we have our light is affecting the darkest light zones in our image, highlights, okay, a little bit brighter, and specular, very, very bright. So, perfect. So now, with that said, we can start making a few more adjustments. We are going to start in our dark zone, okay? And the first thing we're going to do here on the dark wheel, okay, we are going to basically lower the exposure a bit to this. So we're going to take it down to something like that. All right. And you can see that this is affecting mainly the foreground, right? How do I know? It's because I'm playing a bit over here, but you also can click over here. You see you have this option. If you click and hold, this is showing you the area what that tonal range is affecting. So the darks are affecting our foreground, you can see over here, and parts of our foreground a little bit over here. And you can do this, by the way, for every single wheel. You can see that blacks here, we're basically affecting almost nothing. Just this part over here. As you can see, then we have our shadow, which obviously affects basically the entire foreground and not only parts of the sky a bit and our mountain range over here. And you can do the same, by the way, as again for the light. You see mostly the sky. Then we have our highlights, right? A little bit of the clouds, a little bit here, and then specular are the very, very bright parts in our sky. Okay. Perfect. So that is a way to see it. All right. That you could, pinpoint which adjustments are you basically affecting. What are you really adjusting? That is the way to do it. It's right over here. Great. So now with that done, what we're going to do now that we lowered our we're going to lower exposure here, okay, to add the shadows in the foreground bushes, as we said over here. So we're going to take it down to something like that. Okay, great. And now you can see that this is great. However, we can also add a little bit more to it. So we're going to enhance now the foreground. We're going to add a little bit of saturation here. And because it feels still a little bit too desaturated, so we are going to go into our shadow, okay? Because we want to affect more of it. Remember, the dark is affecting just parts of our bushes, but you can see that the shadow, it's basically the entire foreground here. And we are going to add a little bit more to it. Okay, so here on our saturation, we are going to increase it to about 1.2, okay, something like that, and that's making a big difference now. By the way, you can always check how far you're taking things, and now you can see that if we look back, look how desaturated, all right, and lifeless this looks compared to this. Look how much we brought back. Huge difference. I really like how the greenery over here is looking. It's looking pretty nice. Okay, so now that we did a bit our dark zones, let's work on our light zones, okay? So light, highlight, and specular. Remember, once again, if you don't want this, you can bank it over here, right? Bank with global color wheels if you want to move between them. Now, with that, we are now going to work basically on these main 3 ones, and we are going to start with our highlight, okay? And on our highlight, we are dropping a little bit the exposure, something like, it's a little bit too bright, so we're gonna push it a bit. Okay, something like that works. Okay, and you can see that now I'm looking at my scopes as well. Okay, look at the scopes. You see that we're a bit too high over here. So you take it down, and now by doing this, that allows us to add a little bit more contrast to our sky, because now I can take the specular, all right, and we're gonna see more contrast here in the clouds. All right, so now we're going to take our specular, and this way, with the exposure, we are going to add more to it, to add that contrast, as we just discussed. So we're going to take this up, okay? And you can see how much that is doing over there in the clouds. Okay, and now we can see that we really are brought back a lot of contrast there. You see, this is the before, this is the after. Look at that. This looks a little bit flatter, all right, and not as much separation. And now we can see that we have separated much, much more. Right, so, and then the next step we're going to take here is that we are going to take our light over here, the exposure. We're going to lower it a little bit over here, okay? So we are going to darken the sky, but we're going to still keep that detail, right? Because we added with our specular highlight over here. So the exposure, we're going to go down to about something like that to add further, okay, contrast, something like that. And you can see that now before and after, okay? So our image is looking really, really good right now. Perfect. And the next thing we can also do over here, we can make definitely the sky a little bit bluer. So over here on our light, we can basically now drag this towards blue, something like that. Now see that it's very easy to go too far. So something like that should work, okay? So this before and this the after. Now, if you feel like it's overdone, once again, just go back and really dial it in the way you like it. All right. Yeah, a little bit too much. So let me redo it. Again, this is going to go to -70 over here. And then we're going to drag it towards blue. All right, perfect. Something like that. Another thing that you could do over here, you can see that in the HDR palette option menu, you have here display X and Y and display angle and strength. All right. So now the display X and Y over here, basically this allows you to adjust the control point horizontally and vertically. However, if you do choose the display angle and strength, okay, this will move the control point in a circular motion, okay, to determine the hue, and on a radius to determine the saturation. This is very good if you're trying to make very fine adjustments, okay, where you know you want to really pinpoint the user adjustments in the HDR palette. That is why this is perfect. So now we're going to keep it here to display X and Y. Okay, perfect. And once again, if you feel like that things are looking good, however, you don't know if you affected the right range, once again, look over here. Okay, so you know exactly what these ranges are affecting, as you can see. Now, something else that maybe you might wonder is, how do I though change, okay, I don't want to, if I'm holding here, how do I know how I'm affecting exactly the right range, okay? So something you can do alternatively to just like holding and clicking and sort of, because you're going a little bit by memory here, trying to remember, oh, what was it again? Now, what you could do technically is to instead choose the highlight over here, and you can see then now, whether you're working on this, whether you're working on that, all right, that is going to make any adjustments. So you can see that if I go on this range now, it's showing me the highlight, okay, as you can see. If I go back to my light and I make adjustments here, now it shows me the light, okay? So basically with the highlight on, it's going to show you whichever one of the wheels you're working with automatically, which is also very, very useful, okay? Perfect. Now, with that done, we can now disable it because we don't need it, because so far things are looking good for us. And the next thing, we can also add here a little bit of contrast to our image, and we can bring this up a little bit, all right, to something like that. And then we can also add a little bit of, we can pivot our image, all right, to something like that. Should work. All right, perfect. And now you can see this is the before and this is the after. And really, it's very, very easy to do that with the HDR palette. Now, another thing we can do here is to increase the midtone detail, and we can sharpen a little bit the clouds and a little bit of our green foreground over here. So on the midtone detail, we can bring that up a bit, okay? If you go too far, you can see it looks too excessive. So you want to, once again, name of the game is subtlety. So very, very subtle. Something like that. All right, so you can see that now we bring up a lot of, okay, we sharpen our detail, much more detail in our image over here. Now, with that done, the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to look at also something else, which is over here close to it. You can see that we have the zones graph, okay? So now if I click the zones graph, we have something like this, all right? And you might be wondering, what the heck is this? Now, this is very easy, okay? The zones graph basically is showing us visually what each, all right, whether that is black, dark, shadow, light, highlight, specular, what each zone is covering. So you can see that the black is covering this area. The dark is covering all of this area, Okay, so this is a broader selection compared to the black over here. Then you have our shadow, which is even the broadest out of all of the dark zones, okay? With our black being the less broad, then dark, and then shadow being very broad. And then you have our light over here. So now, something strange, you might wonder, but if the shadow starts here and the light starts here, what is this area? Well, that is an area where both of them, okay, meet in the middle, all right? And this is, remember, 18% middle gray over here. So that is a little bit on overlap, about 2 stops, okay, between the shadow and light. And then you can see then we have our highlight, all right, which is obviously less broad, and then the specular, which is the least out of all of the light zones over here. Okay, so these what all they do. Okay, now you can deactivate the zones as well over here, hide them. Okay, you can do this for each zone, as you can see over here. And the next thing, you can also delete them, all right? So now you can delete these, but I'm gonna show you something very interesting in just a second. And you can see under here, you have create new zone. So technically you create your own zone, all right? You can decide whether you want in the dark zone or the light zone over here. You make the selection you want, you can name it. So in this case, let's say this is our test, okay, and it's going to be in our dark zone over here, and then you give it a range, all right, whatever range that you want, something like that, and then you say create, and now you can see that the test is right over here. Okay, you can also hide our test, all right, you can also delete it, just like that. So now you can't delete the standard presets that you have in Resolve, but you can create your own zone, all right, and technically hide all of the preset ones, and you're now creating your own, okay, parameters and tonal ranges that you want, which is awesome. Okay, so that is also something to be aware of. Now, you can see that we also have here the max range, and we have something called a fall off, all right, underneath there. And what do they do? So now, the most important thing is that now these zones can be moved to specific areas, okay? So now, by selecting the dark here, all right, as you can see, our max range is right now it's like -1.5. Okay, so now I can click that, and you can see that we're actually moving now our zone. All right, we can make it broader or less broad depending on what you want to do with it. Okay, as you can see over here. And not just that, so this is the maximum or minimum range, but you also have the fall off, which you can see is this light, all right, light colored, almost sort of technically very light color red over here. And you can also add a greater fall off. As you can see now, it's much greater, so it's smoother and softer, okay? Or you can go back and make it less, okay? So that is really up to you. And then you can also come here, and then you can, as you can see, reset things. Now I'm gonna undo that. Perfect. And you can see that, okay, you can make all the adjustments that you want. And then by double clicking, once again, you reset it. So now say you went too far, something like that, okay, with your fall off, double click, you reset it once again. And that is a bit about our graph, okay, and how the graph works. And you can see that how quickly we can make adjustments here in our HDR palette, okay. You can see this is the before, this is the after. What a huge difference. Now again, we did this quickly. Maybe it's a little bit too blue. You'd obviously dial it back and make all the adjustments necessary to make it look better. But this is just the example. All right, perfect. So now we are going to go back into our main palette over here, okay, as you can see, and we are going to click on our clips, and we are going to go on clip number 3, where we created the other node, our HDR, okay. We actually did on clip number 4. So we're going to do it here on clip number 3. And we are going to call this the HDR balance. All right. Now, this is something very common when working with HDR footage, where you can see that here we have a very bright window. However, here we are underexposed. So there is a huge difference, okay, in between what we see here inside, where all of our characters are, and what we see in our window, which is definitely overexposed, okay? There is something that you're gonna run a lot through, all right? So now let's make a few adjustments and see how we can work through this as well. Now, something very important here, because so far we talked about our main palette and we talked about our zones graph. However, you can have all of that in one window. And the way to do that is to come here and to expand it. Now, once you expand it, you can see that we're basically taking over all of this area. As you can see, our curves here in the middle disappeared. Okay, so we took our left and central palette just for our HDR grading over here. Okay, and you can see that this can be very, very useful, because now not only you can make very pinpointed selections, but you can, however, also go here and then decide, okay, how exactly or which areas you really want to affect. Okay, which is very, very useful. We're going to start with the dark, okay, because looking at the image over here on our clip, the first thing you want to work on is always your character, because that what is the audience pay attention to that mainly. Okay, when you work, whether you work in a documentary, in a movie, that's the first thing you should always take care of. So we're going to start here with our dark. Okay, and definitely we're going to now come here on our exposure and raise that a bit to something like that. Okay, so we raise that a bit, and now you can see that it's looking better. All right, but still we have an issue over here. As you can see, that this is way too bright right now. Okay, and you can see here on, I'm looking at the scopes, everything is clipping, as you can see. So we got to take that a bit down. So we are going to now see which area, right, is affecting in our light parts, what is affecting mainly our window. So you can come here and check the light, and you can see that that is definitely, all right, what's affecting the most, what's affected the most over here. Then you see our highlight as well and the specular. Okay, so we're going to start with the light being the broadest in this case, because all three of them technically you can make adjustments, but light being the broadest, okay, that makes the most sense. And we're definitely going to take our exposure and drag it down by a lot. Okay, you can see that we're not affecting, okay, as much our indoors, but mainly that window. Okay, and we're going to drag it down. Okay, now I'm looking here at the scopes. You can see what a huge difference that made. I mean, look how much you were clipping here, and look how much we brought it back down there. Okay, huge difference. Now we can also now increase our specular, all right, the exposure. So over here, and we are going to take it up a bit. All right, so we bring back a bit of that to something like that. Okay, and now things are looking a little bit better. Now, the next thing we're going to do over here is to reduce our highlights a little bit over here. And specifically, we are going to reduce the saturation, okay? And we are going to take this down a little bit to about 0.6. All right, to something like that. Perfect, okay? And you can see that things are looking better and better, okay, as we keep working on that. All right. Now, the next thing, though, that we want to do here, now that we made all of these adjustments, is to raise now our global a bit, because it's a little bit too dark in this case by looking at it. And we're going to take that up by a bunch over here. Okay, so we're going to brighten the image by a lot, actually. I'm going to keep taking it up to about something like that. Okay, now you can see that everything is, okay, looking good. It's looking brighter, it's looking nicer, and we don't have any underexposed characters or anything like that. All right, so we are in really good shape. Perfect. Now, another thing that we could do here is here we, on the light zone over here, we are actually going to reduce the minimum range a bit, okay, under the graph over here, so that until this light spill that you can see here, okay, appears more pronounced. So over here, we are going to definitely take this down a bit to something like, you can see, oh, that's a little bit too much. Okay. To something like, all right, instead of doing it there, actually, I am going to do it here on the light, and we are going to lower it to something like minus, right over there, minus 70. Looks good here on our minimum range. And something else you might want to do here with the fall off, you might want to increase that, okay, so that you reduce a bit of artifacting and you have a smoother fall off. So we're gonna take this, okay, you can see that represented here in the graph, and we're gonna take that up, okay, so we get something like that. Keep increasing it. I'm looking at the graph as well, as you can see over here specifically. That's where the fall off is affecting. okay, in our light. Okay, perfect. And now you can see that we have something like that, all right? A brighter image. This is the before, this is the after. You can see what a huge difference that makes, okay? Now, obviously, we still would like to have a little bit more contrast here, okay? But remember that you're working with very overexposed outdoors, okay? Compared to what you had inside, which was really, really dark, okay? So that's already a huge difference. Now, something we could do technically is to add a little bit of mid-tone detail, okay, to sharpen things a bit, all right? So now this is max, okay, which is not bad actually, but you can add a little bit of that, okay? So we sharpen things out inside and outside a bit. However, things are looking good so far. Then we can also here come onto our temperature, or here, whether you're gonna go this way, and you can go and add a little bit, cool it down a little bit to something like that. That's good, as you could see. And then we could do the same with our tint, all right? A little bit towards green. Something like that. Something like that works, okay? Now you can see before and after. So we basically balance our clip better. Now this is normalized and balanced. Now we can create a new node over here, and we can add a look, quick look over here. This is our look, and what we could do is to now ungang these and start working on, we can start with our blue. All right, and we can do something like that. Okay. Okay, and then on our red, take it down a bit, and over here, take it up. All right, so add a little bit of a look to it, if anything. Okay, I'm gonna switch my blue, a little less pronounced here. Red a little more. So we get something like that, okay? Before and after. You can see that we can add a quick look. Now, the look, it's really up to you how you want to do it, all right? You can do warm look with cool shadows, or you could do the opposite. So it's really up to you, the way you want to do it. But that is just a quick example of the things you could do. As you can see now, when you basically are working with the HDR palette, all right? When you're outputting to an SDR, okay, to HDR standards, basically grading the raw media, it's almost the same, right? Very few differences compared to non-raw media, okay? Obviously, the dynamic range does demand increased attention, but the creative primary and secondary workflows are basically the same. It's very, very similar. When you're working and outputting to an HDR standard, all right, so high dynamic range, you have to make sure to give it extra care, okay? Because those tone ranges are very important, and you really want to be very pinpoint and make very, very minute details, and be very, very careful with that. Now, something else to also be aware of, for some of you that might have the mini panel, which I do have over here, by the way, the way to activate, okay, to say you're over here, how do I access it? This is for you guys that have the mini panel. All you have to do is press the user button down here, and then press the HDR, and you can see that it just appeared over here, okay? So I'm gonna do it one more time. You can press your user, and then HDR, and then your HDR palette is over there. And then if you want to move or bank in between your wheels, you have the options to go to previous zone. As you can see, I'm moving, and next zones, okay? On your soft keys above the right display over here. As you can see, I'm doing that through the panel right here. All right, guys, you don't need a panel, by the way, to do these. You can do it very, very well, all right, inside of Resolve with your mouse. However, one thing that I did notice making a huge difference is when you're working, okay, specifically when I'm working with color and I'm trying to add whether that is a little bit of blue, right, so cool things off or make it a little bit warmer. It does make a difference to have those wheels, the panel. But other than that, you know, you can do basically everything with your mouse. So that is something also to be aware of. Okay, so now with that said, now let's move on to the next thing, which is how do we set up a render cache for raw media projects? So the first thing we're going to do here is I am going to click here on clips. All right, and these are all of our clips, and we're going to go on clip number 1. Okay, we did our grade over here. And here, what we can do now is to go back to our playback. First of all, we need to make sure that the render cache is on smart. Okay, if it was a none, we wouldn't have any render cache going on. So it's on smart over here. And now let's see what happens. Okay, if we go back to our project settings, and here in the master settings, if you remember from earlier, we have the option here, optimize media and render cache. Okay, render cache format here now is on ProRes 422 HQ. Okay, so now let's go to even a lower format, so something like ProRes 422 proxy. Okay, so a lower quality one, and with that selected, now I can click here on save. Okay, and now you can see that everything is in red here because once again it's gonna reload and it's gonna take a few seconds. Now, why is it important to understand the quality? Okay, why is it important for us to select a proper render cache format? Now, it's because obviously if you have a render cache, so you're doing real-time playback and you have a lower quality, okay, format, what's going to happen is that now you're going to have a bit of bending. Things are not going to look, the colors are not going to look as good. Okay, it's just, you can see it here. You see all this, it almost looks like pixelated a bit. So things don't look that good. Obviously, this is because the format, it's a lower format. So now that can really affect your image and the way you are also doing qualifiers and all these different selections. This is why if you're using render cache, is very, very important to avoid all of these issues. To change it, go back here on project settings, and instead of the render cache format ProRes 422 proxy, okay, or something lower quality, we're going to go for something really high quality. Okay, so now something that can tell us that, okay, I feel good, I think I'm safe, and this should be really, really good. So now something that could work for us, very high quality, is this ProRes 4444 HDR for HDR grading. Okay, so by clicking that and now pressing save over here, once again it's gonna recache everything because we changed formats once again, and obviously it's pretty fast, as you can see. And now if I go full screen, you can see that we don't have any of that banding and any of that, right, almost like pixelated. Really didn't look that good, the image. Okay, so now with that, you know, you can, as you can see, you can play back in real time without any issue. So now the 12-bit depth codecs, okay, such as the one we use, the ProRes 444, are HDR compliant, okay, and this can be used for cinema and UHD 4K delivery. Okay, so that is the most important thing, and this is why it's important for you to select a really good codec, okay, a really good render cache format over here. So that is a very, very big advantage. Now, because of this high quality, okay, you can use a 12-bit render cache in the final export of a project as well, by the way, here on the deliver page. Okay, so when you prepare the render settings in the deliver page over here, and you can see we're going to go through this in the next lesson, by the way, and under here on the advanced settings, all right, you can expand this and then select the use render cache images. And because we are so confident that that is such high quality, then now we know for sure that we are not going to have any problems if we do use the render cache images. That is the advantage of really having such high quality, okay, render cache. Now, once again, is this optimal to use all the time? Well, it depends. If priority for you is to play things in real time and you don't have a machine that is powerful enough for you to do it, then yes, having render cache on, it's very beneficial, of course. Still, I wouldn't go for a final delivery just like that. I would obviously go back onto my playback, okay, render cache, I would go to none and check things out without the render cache over here and make sure that things are the way I want it to. Everything looks great, right? And, you know, I'm confident that if I go for a delivery, everything is the way that I'd envisioned it, okay? But this is very good to use the render cache in case you have a machine that is not as strong and you're looking for real playback in real time, which is very, very important. Okay, so that is a bit about that. So thank you guys once again for watching and really following along this series, okay? This was lesson number 9, okay? So far, we've been going through a lot of different topics in terms of color grading, okay? And this is the last lesson before delivering, which is going to be our final lesson over here. It's going to be in the deliver page, how we deliver projects, okay? And with that said, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.